Well, thanks everybody for coming. Welcome. We're glad you're here. Came to continue our celebration of Dagny, Walton, and this wonderful exhibition. It's actually been up for a few months. We installed it right before the holidays, I think, and then we had the holidays, and then the month of January, as a lot of you know, is consumed with our annual art auction, and then also the first weekend in February is consumed with that. And so we got to March and we thought we were going to have the month of Dagny. So we've had a members event. We had a great first Friday last week, and then we have this kind of different event for us. And we thought we'd invite in the writing community. Dagny's wife, Alexandra, is a writer. Excuse me. And we just kind of brainstormed in a program meeting and thought, you know, the stories and fiction. What if we, just put an open call out for really short fiction? And Dagny loved the idea. And so here we are with that. Dagny's been super receptive and responsive and really wonderful to work with throughout the whole time with this exhibit. She's really one of the good ones. Thank you for that. I'm going to read Ma'am's Declaration of Relationships, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dagny, and she's going to talk about the flow of the evening. Ma'am is committed to representing contemporary Indigenous artistic expression faithfully and collaboratively. Ma'am recognizes the ongoing sovereignty of the Salish and Kalispé tribal people who agreed through treaty to live in peace with settlers of this land. Tribal people inspire Ma'am's efforts to create and maintain a beloved, inclusive community. Ma'am respects the original sacrifice made by Indigenous people. Without further ado, Dagny. Watch your step. We got some.
We have a low wall over here. Yeah. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. First Friday was really wild, and I'm actually really happy that this turned out to be like a small, kind of intimate crowd. I think that ghost stories are best told in small, quiet, tight spaces. Yeah, this is our final scheduled event for this exhibition. It's had a really great run. I've been especially excited for this one. I think the short story idea, whoever came up with bringing that into this exhibition, I think really hit the nail on the head with this. Writing is a huge part of my art practice. A lot of my work is made in reference to works of literature. I'm always kind of curious about how you can translate the craft techniques of writing into art making, into printmaking, into just visual storytelling. And of course, Alexandra, our relationship, one of the cornerstones of it is creative collaboration. I think we feed off of our own creative disciplines in that way. So I was really excited to be able to open this show up to writing, right, as a creative discipline. And we have so many talented writers in this community and outside of it. I mean, one of the winning authors, I believe, is from Montana, but lives in Nebraska now. So just the fact that this show has had that kind of reach and resonance, I think, is really special. Jurying was pretty tricky. We had a lot of great submissions, and Alexandra and I eventually came to the decision that we couldn't choose just one winner, so we ended up choosing three, and all three of those winning stories will be read tonight. And one of the reasons why we felt we had to choose three is that when I first went into making this show, into conceiving of it and planning it and working on it, I had this very set idea of what the idea of haunting meant to this show. For me, the haunting is limited to the idea of spirits that animate the landscape, right? Elements of the landscape made somehow phantasmal, given a face and a body and a life and an active agency, right, to move through the world. And then in conversations with members of the community, in reading the submissions, I realized that everyone has a different idea, a different interpretation of what ghosts and hauntings mean in this space. So we had to choose, I think, three different stories that showcased these different interpretations of hauntings. And I don't want to spoil the stories before we get into them, but I just want to say a few quick words of praise. Like Lady Pajamas, your story is so emotionally evocative. I think that it speaks to the idea of ghosts as memories, right? Ghosts of home, ghosts of longing, ghosts of feeling homesick. Hubble's, yours is so allegorical. It feels like a fable, right? That a mom tells her child to keep him from going out into the woods at night, like the classic ghost story. And Danilo, who was unable to make it tonight, again, I said he lives in Nebraska, I think. His piece is a really brutal interpretation of the ghosts that spring out of a system of settler colonial violence, right? When an act of violence is enacted in the landscape and ripples outward, how does the landscape respond, right? What magic does it work in retribution to that act of brutality and cruelty? So I think we'll read those stories first. They shouldn't take very long. Again, all of them are under 500 words, I think. And we'll open it up to tell some ghost stories around here. Lady Pajama, would you like to start us off? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was really so mind-blowingly stoked to get picked. As a lot of you know, I'm mostly a visual artist. I do write I write on a regular basis. I have a zine that I put out once a month, but it's mostly personal essay and poetry. Not so much fiction. I never write fiction. But when I saw this art call, I love the combining of the art world and the writing world, and there's all these amazing creative people in Missoula, and it's just nice when they can intersect, and I don't know, it's just builds fabric of community, right? And so I loved the idea so much that I really, really wanted to participate, which got me writing. So it's all good. Without further ado, this is called Branches of My Lungs. Were I to do it all over again, I might have chosen a different place to die. I might have stayed in the comfort of my homeland. Maybe I would have starved, but I would have died in the arms of my mother, father, brother, died in the home I was born in, died in that bare wooden room, on that lumpy bed I spent countless nights hating. But instead, I am here. My spirit blows over the plains. It blows and resets. I get tangled in the sagebrush. I become the sagebrush. My fingers, the greens at the tips. The branches, my insides. The branches, my lungs. The branches, my nervous system. My toes dig in the dirt. I am sagebrush. But for how long? How long until the bush dries up and the roots let go? As it is torn from me, I realize I was never it, and it was never me. I blow across the plain, and I moan. I moan because I cannot cry. I moan, I moan, I moan for home. And that's it.
That's your fee. How about, would you like to join us up here?
Okay. Well, thanks to Dagny for being amazing and creating such amazing art, and to Ma'am for this amazing exhibition, and hopefully this microphone will stay. And this story is called The Immortals. Of the 10,000 spirits inhabiting this land, most are hateful. Let us hear of the weeping women who use desire as death's currency. Once a man acquired a vast land holding, and then his wife, but the woman bore him no children. He said, I will never be immortal through my offspring. The man turned to his wife. Leave me now and live your days in disgrace. The man's selfishness made him cruel to his land and animals, who turned against him. No calf was born into his field. No crop grew from tilled earth. One day he was out riding. The sun beat down. His horse flagged. He spotted a cave in a hill and rode there to rest. No sooner had he fettered his horse than he heard soft crying echoing from inside the cave. At once the man followed the sound into the hill. The cave darkened, and he struck a match. When the match flared, there stood a woman robed in white. "Help me," she said. "I'm lost in this darkness." "Don't worry," the man said. "I'll lead you out." Just then, they heard a soft wail from deeper in the cave. The woman said, "My sister, find her, and I will wed you and love you devotedly until your death of old age." The man agreed, for he desired devotion. He lit another match, and they descended deeper into the earth. Soon they came to the woman's sister, draped in green. "I am hopelessly lost," said the woman in green. "We'll find our way back out," the man said. "Bless you, good man." But they heard another cry from below. "Our sister! Save her, and together we'll raise crops and animals to fill your fields." The man agreed, for he desired the land's offerings. He lit another match to delve deeper into the cave. Soon the three found a weeping woman draped in blue. "I feared myself lost forever," she said. "Bless you, brave man." But before they could climb back out of the cave, another wail wafted up from the depths. "Our last sister," said the woman in blue. "Save her, and I will bear you a son to carry your name." The man agreed, for he desired a legacy. He lit another match and crept still deeper into the cave. Soon they found a chamber. The fourth sister stood draped in a dire red robe. "Welcome, sir," she said. "You have found your immortality. Your story will live on." The women encircled him, then vanished at once in a howling wind that blew out the man's match. He struggled to light another. When he did, the light touched no woman. He searched the earthen room, but found no sign of them or the chamber's exit. His match flickered low, and he reached for another, but found his box empty. As the light dwindled, the man peered at his feet. The dying light shone on yellowed bones scattered about, the remains of the other immortals. Thanks.
Cool. With Danilo Thomas, our third author, unable to join us, I'll be reading his story in his absence. I just want to say, just at the top here, this is a story about a massacre, and violence, cruelty, death they're all very present here. I just wanted to say that, just for safety's sake. This is called Pretty Woman of Bear Creek by Danilo Thomas. At dusk, sun and moon shared the sky. Baker arrived with men on horseback. They sought Mountain Chief, but he traveled north with his band. It didn't matter. Not that some of them were ill with smallpox, that they were on reservation land, or that Heavy Runner armed himself with signed treaties. Only death staunched Heavy Runner's bleeding. Only death staunched the blood flowing from the Blackfoot. Except for Wawatsika's blood. Curled into the river bend, her people screamed and her village burned. She scratched thighs and forearms, gathering skin under her fingernails. She pressed her dirtied palms into the small rivulets she had made, and her hands streaked crimson. It would not be enough. She crawled, searching for a stick or a rock to open a vein. She found instead a fawn tucked into the grass. Its mother had dropped it and fled, and stillness was its defense. It bowed, ears pinned, bright eyes lidded. Wawatsika curled into the deer for warmth, smothering it with her weight until it stopped fighting. She reached down its throat, and it painted her hand red. Moon witnessed Wawatsika's medicine. Her brown skin and hide clothing blanched under moon's bright beams. Sun witnessed Wawetsika's medicine. Her hair became dawn under sun's bright beams. Wawetsika crawled to the river. It ran muddy in the waterhole. Upstream and down, Baker's men had shot the children escaping to the frozen river. Baker's men shot the parents cradling their dead children in their arms. The unkilled were stripped and left to wander the winter. The water was icy and muddy and still, and the river showed Wawetsika her new face. The voice that carried her rage was no longer her own. It melted the winter and brought out the riders hidden in the snow. They appeared on the far shore with their guns drawn. They fired shots into the dead to anger Wawetsika's hiding people. Wawetsika swiped at her reflection. Her left arm, covered in mud, browned. Her right arm, smeared in blood, still red. Horses forged the freezing waters. Swept up by the first, the cowboy wondered aloud how little Miss had arrived among the Indians. He smelled of stale smoke and rancid tarn and the fierce sweat of his lathered horse. In the distance, war cries and gunfire and the silence of those wandering and paling from exposure. It was dawn. Sun and moon shared the sky. Cowboy turned his horse. Wawetsika gripped his waist so she would not be thrown. Upon the ground, draped about the silenced fawn, Wawetsika's dark skin and hair writhed and twisted and crawled down the animal's throat. Filled with her, the fawn stood and barked until Wawetsika's skin stretched from its mouth and grew. Wawetsika's red right hand reached for the rider, for the horse, for Wawetsika, and the rider drew his guns. Sun and moon shared the sky, and they witnessed doom. So thank you to Danilo, wherever he may be, for that. Gosh, let's tell some freaking ghost stories. I can start and just open it up unless someone would like to share first. Okay. I have a weird one. This is not maybe what you would call a typical ghost story, but I think that it is an example of a story where your sort of ideas of reality and physical perception in the world are stretched. So when Alexander and I first moved to Missoula, it was 2018, and I really needed a job, and we were living at the Elks Lodge, just a couple blocks down on Patty Street. And I didn't have a car yet, and my main criterion for a job was something that was close, something that was walkable. And I ended up getting a job just a little bit further down on Patty as a housekeeper at the Holiday Inn. And working as a housekeeper is so regimented. You know, it's a very like step A, step B, step C, step D process. And so when something unexpected happens, it really like, you know, seizes you, it really surprises you. And there was one day where I was cleaning a room. I was cleaning it thoroughly. You know, the prior guests had checked out, so I was cleaning it from top to bottom. And I was at this point where the room was clean. I was just like bringing the new linens in. So I was in front of my cart, kneeling in front of my cart to get the bed sets, right, that were all kind of stashed on the lowest run of this tiered cart. And I heard this weird clattering, like right above my head. And I could feel the motion of something moving up there, like something swinging back and forth above my head. And I looked up, and somehow, from somewhere, this clothes hanger had fallen and hooked itself perfectly around the top shelf of this cart. It like hooked itself around the lip of the cart. I had no idea where it came from. I, looked around the hallway, and there was no one there who could have dropped it there. It didn't fall from the ceiling. There were no hooks or holes that it could have fallen from. It wasn't hooked around, the door jamb. I would have noticed it. It just like blipped into existence and like fell right onto my housekeeping cart. And the weirdest thing about it to me was that it wasn't even the type of clothes hanger that we used in the hotel. It's this thick black plastic hanger, and we use those really horrible like wire hangers with the bits of paper that cover the like open triangle. And somehow it just like ended up there. I remember I put it on my cart, took it back to the Lost and Found because I was like, I don't know what to do with this thing, and left it there. And I always wonder, like, has it just gone around and like traveled somewhere else? You know, has it like popped into, I don't know, another Holiday Inn in like Maine or something, and you know, Georgia or whatever. But yeah, so not maybe a typical ghost story, but one of the weirdest things that certainly ever happened to me in my life. So I wanted to share that. And it's local, you know, it's just like a couple blocks away. Yeah. Does anyone have something like that? It was in the renovated part though. It wasn't the old like, you know, 1980s rooms. It was like the new part. Yeah. That's my.
Had like a ghost shirt on it that you just couldn't see.
Yeah, right. Some like pants. He's like, can you do my laundry? No. Yeah. Who would like to go next?
I will.
Yeah, come on up.
You guys all heard of the shadow people? Yeah. You know, like Navajos get all weirded about it. Well, like if you ever smoke weed or you see somebody that's really hammered and they're talking to someone, it's usually a shadow person. Or like, you know, when you get that feeling that someone's looking at you from behind, you look, there's nothing there. It's a shadow person. Well, I'll tell you my experience with the shadow person. All right. Like, I got in, we were playing around in a scary house, and my grandpa used to say, don't play in these messed up places, or something will follow you home. So, like, every night I'd go to sleep, and this thing would be over my face, and I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, and every time it did it, I'd get madder and madder and madder at it. And then I thought I was the only one seeing it. My cousin comes out one day and he says, hey, do you see that thing over us? I was like, yes. I've been trying to beat it up. And he's like, yeah. And then he explained what he thought it was. And I said, yeah, it's a shadow person. And then one day my grandpa says, you know what you need to do to get rid of it is, you know how you get mad, turn yourself into light. And so I was sitting there and like it was over me heavily. And I kept getting mad, and when I just sat up, and like my body felt so heavy, like do you guys ever stand up on a Gravitron? Or like lean up like that? That's what it feels like. And so so I got a hold of it, and then, I don't know, as you know, like I lit up. And so after that, the shadow person didn't bother me anymore. But the crazy thing about it is, like, when I went to Navajo country, the Navajo lady, this one lady came over and gave me a necklace and said, you have strong medicine. You should come with us to the peyote thing. It was pretty fun. But yeah, when I'd go somewhere, there were like all these, like when I'd go because I did powwows, a lot of those old ladies would say, you got strong medicine, you be strong. But yeah, the shadow people. So if you feel like something watching you, remember, it's shadow people.
I wasn't expecting to tell ghost stories, but I grew up in a very haunted house. Yeah, Brian was just like, you've got stories to tell. I'm like, oh, okay, I do. Grew up in Kansas City, and I think we were the second family in this house, and there was a gentleman he died while living in the house, but not in the house. So it wasn't, that level. And none of us talked about this until we moved out of the house. All of us just started telling these stories about that house was messed up. I will try not to curse. So the light in our hallway, and it was like when I was little, it was it felt like the Willy Wonka hallway that just kept getting longer and longer and longer, and the lights were always out. I mean, always out. The light bulb was just always not working. And my brother's room and my sister's room was across from each other, and I was at the end of the hallway. And I would run like the fastest I could run ever because it was a dark hallway and my house was really scary. And growing up in Kansas, Wizard of Oz is the yearly thing that you watch, so everything's witches. No matter what it is, it's going to be a witch. That's how it's going to be the Wicked Witch of the West. And so I'm in between, I'm running, and two witches reach out, grab me, lift me up off the ground, and slam me on my back. And I catch myself, and I just run into the living room, and I tell everybody, there's a ghost, and they're all just like, yeah. And they all knew that there was a ghost in our house. They're like, we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to say a thing. My mother felt hands on her shoulders in the basement, and she would talk to it and say, we're going to take care of this house. She was very spiritual. She claims that's all she felt. But our basement was so scary. I thought every single basement ever in the world was the scariest basement. Like my friends would be like, you want to go down the basement? No! Are you kidding? Why would I go in the basement? And the lights were, it's always, you're at the very, very end of the basement, and you leave the lights on. It's always had to do with lights. You're running through the dark always, and you feel like something's chasing you. Yes. So my sister, she was in her, late teenage years, and she and her best friend were, smoking some weed in the basement. Bad things happen in the basement. And they both look up at the same time at the door, and there's a man standing there. And they both are thinking, wow, this is some good weed. And then they were like, did you see that? Yeah, I saw that. They're like, okay, that wasn't the weed. We couldn't hallucinate the same exact thing that was standing in the doorway. Things fell off the shelves all the time in the basement. You would just see jars just pushed off and broken on the floor. So we don't have a basement now, really, in our house. I don't like basements. So our house now that we live in is haunted, or it has spirits around it and in it. I wouldn't say it was haunted like the house I grew up in, but we live up Grant Creek. We live on the creek, and we do know that there was native settlement up there before Europeans came in and built homes and roads and sewers and all those things. And it seems like a lot of times things happen when I'm alone and Brian isn't in the house. But one of my early experiences was laying in bed and Brian's asleep and I'm reading a book, and I hear right outside my window just this beautiful, soft, native music, indigenous music. It was a flute and a drum and humming, and it was just beautiful. And I put my book down, and it would stop. Put my book up, start reading, and it starts again. Put my book down, and it stops. And I did that a few times until basically I just kind of held the book until I just felt like I was going to go to sleep. But that was just lovely. I then, in the same house, and Brian was out of town when this happened, and he came home, I'm like, we're saging. We are saging the property, we're saging the house. But I heard sawing, like sawing a tree. It was sawing. And it's in a corner of the house that's very close to the creek. Corner of the house. And I am just like looking behind. It's where our printer's there. I'm looking behind. We do have a crawl space. I went in our crawl space. I crawled all the way across the house to see what is in this corner. Is there an animal down here? I went upstairs above. We have a deck outside that room. I crawled out there, and nothing. Go back in the house. So I was like, I am so sorry someone cut a tree down. I am so sorry that happened. And I'll plant trees. I mean, I'm the person. If you guys know anything about me, I'm the tree hugger of Missoula. So it's like, I am the right person. We will plant trees. We will take care of the trees. And it only happened one more time, and we did plant trees, and we did sage. But every once in a while, there are shadows. And now I'm just not going to sleep well tonight. See a lot of movement. And when Brian would take the dogs hunting, and that's when a lot of movements and things would happen in the house. But so yeah, my life, I've had many, many experiences. So those are my stories.
So I have two stories. One is my father's, and one is mine, and they're related. So my father's he's kind of a crazy man. He does environmental history. He's always in the woods, and he would always tell me this story as a child to scare me. It goes like this. So in the early 1980s, he and his friends, they were a bunch of layabouts in Bellingham, Washington, and they were like, well, we're gonna go in the woods and we're gonna backpack, right? And so in typical 20-year-old guy fashion, they didn't really pack any food, they lit out, and they went to this really remote area of the Idaho Panhandle along the Canadian border. And the trip was already kind of a disaster. It rained a little bit, and one of his friend's parents had gotten him a sleeping bag and a sweepstakes. And when it got wet, they found out it was stuffed with shredded newspaper. So all they had to eat was like candy bars, And it was, a 13-mile hike in to the shores of this really pretty lake in the mountains. They get there, they're already kind of exhausted, and they set up their camp. And that first night, they're all sitting around a fire, they have their tents up along the shores of the lake, and they're talking. And as the sun starts to set and the sky kind of goes blue, they suddenly hear this eerie and all-pervading, howling, singing choir of voices high up in the upper atmosphere somewhere. And he would always describe how all the conversation just died. And so they sat there, and it would rise up, and it would be this sort of tinkling, and it would become deafeningly loud. Something was, and they couldn't identify what direction it came from. It was just exuding somehow from the environment. And so of course that night they kind of went in their tents and went to bed. And none of them slept. And the sound continued all through the night, all through the darkness. And in the morning when they got up, my dad's friend was like, did any of you get the feeling that there was something walking around our tents last night? And of course, at this point, my dad, he would mimic the sound, which I can't do. But this alienness. So for the rest of the trip, they would hike around attempting to find some kind of source. They were like, a radio tower. There were none. There was no settlement for miles around them. And every single night, as soon as the sun went down, they would hear this sound. And of course, it drove them out of their camping trip. And of course, they were becoming increasingly more hungry and just eating candy bars. So that probably didn't help. And he said, ever since then, he has tried to find out what this is. And there's actually accounts of it. An early white explorer of Yellowstone heard the same thing. And when I was a kid, this story really scared me because it's eerie, it's freaky. He would always do the sound. I would be like, Dad, do the sound again, But then I never quite grasped, I think, why this story is truly scary until I was a younger kid, and so this would have been the early 2000s. And growing up, we would go camp at this lake in northern Colorado in the Rockies called Hidden Lakes. And it was a developed campsite. This was car camping. And I was a kid. I loved to play in the lake. I'd always capture all these crawdads, put them in buckets, watch them scoot around. And I remember this one day we were at the campsite. I had my crawdads. And then suddenly, building in the distance was this incredible sound. I'll never forget how terrifying it was. It sounded to me as a child like a monster, like a beast, like this moaning and howling and screaming. And I remember being terrified. And I was like, the crawdads, I can't leave them. So I like dumped them in the water to save them from whatever this was. And I remember my parents too could not identify what the sound was at first. And so I was scared enough I hid inside the truck. But then, down the road came this absolutely massive herd of cattle. There was someone obviously had like a grazing rights on this public land and was driving their cattle. And of course, all the cattle were lowing at the same time. And like the way it sounded like something like a huge and universally alive thing. And ever since then, I connect these stories because I think that these stories are a great example of the uncanny. Because in the uncanny is a part of it is recognizing that something that should not be sentient is in fact sentient. That's why we're afraid of ghosts or like a corpse that's come back to life. And I think that those are two moments where you realize that there's a greater sentience, a greater presence in the world that's bigger than you. But if it's sentient, right, it can also hate you. Sentience can also means malevolence. And that's something that I think we should all be mindful of.
I got another one. There's a old Blackfeet saying, there's a Blackfeet, they call him Goat Man. And if you're bad, you could see him. And so, and it's crazy, this is really true. You can look it up in the Cup Ink Breeze that the cops were chasing him. Like in the 90s, they had like an outbreak of the Goat Man sightings. Well, one time I was driving to my grandpa's out to the ranch, and I had this dog called Frady because she is afraid of everything. And I felt something hit the back of my truck because right before I got to my grandpa's house, there was a train crossing, and it felt like someone was slapping the back of my truck. So I got out, and Frady was being all weirdo, locked the door on me, barking. And so this thing, I didn't really see it, but it ran past me, and I had a high lift jack because I was always getting stuck. So I had boards and high lift jack to shove under my tires. So I grabbed that big old post out of there, and I was swinging at whatever that was, and it disappeared. And like a couple of weeks later, this cop, Big Jim, he's a big old guy, they're chasing my friends because they're kids having fun. They're running from the cops. And they're getting chased by Big Jim, which was a sheriff back then. And there's radio calls still. My Uncle Bill, he has them recorded. But of them saying, do you see what we see? And they're like, yeah, I see now. It's Goat Man, or something. Because they couldn't find those kids. Richie and them, they went and parked down by the river while the cops were out there spotlighting. And what they did was almost go up by the border, come up around to the border, following just this thing running around the fields. And then a couple weeks later, Town Pump up in Browning, he was sitting up there watching everybody. Goat Man was sitting there smoking a cigarette, looking down. Look, there's this big old sign on Town Pump that says Town Pump. And he was sitting there, and all those guys were getting mad, throwing stuff at him. And then the last sighting I seen of him was that he, I was working out at the gym up in Browning at the swim pool, which was pretty cool. And this guy, he starts walking he's working out barefooted type, but his feet were goat prints walking to the showers. And those old Indians, they had sat in they'd go into the sweat. Or well, not the sweat, the sauna. And they'd sit there and sing Indian. And I told one of them, so one starts singing, never seen that guy come back to the gym again. But who knows? He could have came back, but The crazy thing about it was like at the gym, it said, "This is a sauna, not a sweat. So don't burn stuff in here, and you don't need to sing Indian, just covered in sweat." But yeah, those old guys are all sitting there singing. Never seen the guy again, but because you can see his prints. It's pretty cool. Yes.
Circle is closed. Thank you all so much for coming. It's open until about 7 if you want to hang out, walk around. Yeah. Thank you guys.